Okay, gonna give it one more minute for folks to join, and then we're gonna get started. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. All right. I'm going to get us started. So welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today for this learning session on navigating the National Coastal Resilience Fund. Just a few housekeeping items first. Please keep yourself on mute. There are a lot of us here. We want to make sure we're not interrupting anyone. If you need closed captioning, you can turn on the transcription at the bottom of the screen if slides prevent you from seeing the CC. I am Campbell Simmons. I'm the Resilient Communities and Policy Associate at River Network. I'm based in Philadelphia, which is on Lenape land. And for those of you who haven't yet, you can introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your organization, and where you're calling from. So for anyone who may not be familiar with River Network, we've been around for over 30 years. We're a national organization that connects and strengthens the network of water, justice, and river advocates working at various levels across the country. One of the ways we do this is by holding virtual learning sessions and sharing and doing training sessions just like this one. We encourage you all to fill out our evaluation form so you can incorporate your feedback into future sessions, so we can incorporate your feedback into future sessions. And my colleague Deanna will be dropping links in the chat throughout. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in throughout the course of the presentations, and we will be collecting those and addressing them at the end. But yeah, thank you all so much for being here. So as we all know, with the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, there is an unprecedented amount of funding for climate resilience project coming from the federal government. River Network is working to support our community to take full advantage of these federal funds with our Tapping into Federal Funding initiative. The National Coastal Resilience Fund is a grant program funded through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and managed by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. It's a large pool of funding that creates a unique opportunity for community-based organizations looking to do climate resilience work. And it's our hope that we can help share information today that will help you all navigate and take advantage of this funding opportunity. So just to get us started, we have a quick poll for the audience, just to kind of get a sense of who is actually in the room and what folks' experience is with grants like the National Coastal Resilience Fund. So we have 3 quick questions for you all. The first one is, what is your primary affiliation? So are you a community-based organization, a nonprofit? Are you with the government, et cetera, learning institution? And this is just to get a sense of who's with us today. Our second question is, what is your level of experience with federal grants? Do you have some experience? Do you have no experience? Do you have a ton of experience? And lastly, what is your level of experience applying for NFWF funding? NFWF being the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Awesome. Seems like we still have a lot of folks joining us. And yeah, so we're just doing a quick poll right now. But yeah, so for anyone here interested in climate resilience work, we also recently launched an online community of practice for advocates, nonprofits, and community leaders working on equitable, community-led climate resilience nationwide. If you're interested in joining, my colleague Deanna will drop a link to join in the chat. Awesome. So it seems like we have a decent range of experience in terms of accessing federal dollars, as well as some range of experience with trying to apply for NFWF funding as well. And a lot of folks from community-based organizations and national nonprofits. So wonderful to have you all in the room here. And I'm going to quickly introduce our presenters today. And yeah, so we have three presenters, one from the National Fish and Wildlife Federation, and two who are recipients of the National Coastal Resilience Fund. I'm not sure if Alicia has been able to join us yet, but
She
that's all right.
hasn't yet. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. Thanks for letting me know. But anyways, we have two wonderful speakers thus far, but the first is John Compton, who grew up on a peach and apple orchard in South Jersey. After spending time visiting, working on various farms around the country, he came to the Center for Environmental Transformation in Camden, New Jersey in 2017 to run the Urban Farm and Youth Program. He's currently serving as their executive director. He also enjoys reading, making things, and spending time outdoors. And we also have Alicia, who is a proud native of Detroit, Michigan, and mother of three. She and her family currently reside in Toledo, Ohio, where Alicia serves as the executive director for Junction Coalition. And our first presenter, and the last, but definitely not the least, is Ross Weaver. Ross is a program manager for coastal resilience with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Prior to joining NFWF in 2023, he was the program assistant director for Wetlands Watch, working with a range of stakeholders on coastal resiliency and floodplain management within the Commonwealth of Virginia. He's a certified floodplain manager, a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, and a Chesapeake Bay landscape professional. So if you have questions throughout the course of the presentation, just a reminder, you can drop them in the chat, and we will be collecting them and addressing them at the end of the presentations. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Ross to start the presentations off.
Okay, excellent. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Make sure everyone can see that. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for having me. Apologies for being off screen. We're having a little bit of connectivity issues earlier, so hopefully this will solve it. If you hear any, if I start to break up, let me know, and I'll try to run to another room or something. But thanks very much for having me. As Campbell said, my name is Ross Weaver. I've been with NFWF now for a little under a year, primarily managing the National Coastal Resilience Fund. So very happy to talk to you all and get into a little bit more about how to be successful applying to the program. So just to kind of kick things off, in case you're not familiar with the NCRF, this is a fund to restore, increase, and strengthen natural infrastructure to protect coastal communities while also enhancing habitat for fish and wildlife. This program was established in 2018. And then with BIL funding, it's the amount of funding available has expanded quite a bit the last couple of years and carrying on to next year as well. So just to kind of give an overview of what the program looks like currently. So right now we're right in the middle of developing the 2024 grant slate. So we're still going through kind of finalizing all of that. But for this year, we had approximately $144 million available. In terms of the competitiveness of the grant, we received 384 proposals this year, requesting about $775 million, a little bit over that. So it is a very competitive grant opportunity. It's national in scope. In terms of the average award estimates, we don't have caps on anything, but typically we'll see planning and design grants go up to about $1 million. For projects that are very large, we'll often see sometimes that can go up to 2 or 3 million. And then for implementation grants, we see those range quite a bit, but usually they kind of cap out around 10 or $11 million as well. One thing we have noticed is that with all of the inflation, we're seeing grants starting to kind of creep up a little bit higher than that now. In terms of match, when this program was created, we did require a 1-for-1 non-federal match. We no longer do that. We decided that was sort of limiting our ability to work with underserved communities and organizations that may not be able to secure match. So that is no longer a requirement. We still encourage it as a way to really show broad support for different projects. But I'll get into some of the ways that you can sort of think about match creatively if you don't have that cash match available. So, as I mentioned, we're really focusing on two goals with the NCRF, and those are benefiting community resilience and fish and wildlife habitat. And we're doing that through nature-based solutions. So we really want to mimic natural processes with those dual goals, building the resilience of communities to coastal hazards and changing environmental conditions, and also enhancing habitat for fish and wildlife. It's really important that proposals do speak to both of those elements. What are the specific nature-based solutions that are advanced? How will those help deal with those two goals we have? I would say that the biggest thing that we do see is that with such a wide-ranging program, we see projects that have extremely strong habitat benefits, but maybe are lacking with the community side, or vice versa. We'll see, in a more urbanized environment, projects that have really, really strong community benefits, but sometimes struggle meeting the fish and wildlife goals. So I would encourage folks who are interested in this program to really think, pretty creatively about how you can make the case that your projects are dealing with both of these goals we have. And I have a couple of tools to share at the end that will kind of help you illustrate that point as well. So when we talk about nature-based solutions, we're really talking about investments in projects that can restore or expand natural features. So things like coastal marshes, wetlands, dunes and beach systems, oysters, coral reefs, forests, floodplain restoration, restoring barrier islands, basically anything that can minimize the impact of storms and naturally occurring events on nearby communities. So just to give you a couple of examples of things that are a bit trickier for us to fund, we will fund more stormwater green infrastructure projects, but that's a little bit challenging sometimes because for our program, water quality is really more of a secondary goal. So it's hard to sometimes make the case that the water quality is your habitat benefit. Obviously, improving water quality helps a lot with SAVs and oyster reefs and fisheries, but when we think about GI, green infrastructure, we're really thinking about sort of the compound effects of flooding. So if you have storm surge, if your region has subsidence and you're dealing with increased precipitation, I think that becomes a little bit easier to kind of make that case. Another thing that we can fund, but it becomes a little bit tricky, are land acquisition. So the NCRF is primarily funded with federal funds, and those are very challenging to use with acquisition. But we also have private foundational funding. So in those cases, we can do acquisition. But one thing to note is that if we are funding an acquisition project, there really also needs to be a restoration activity on that property as well. One of the excuse me, let me get back here. One of the things that I think is really great about the NCRF is what we call our pipeline process. And I wasn't an NFWF in 2018, but I was working around a lot of this work, and I know there's a real interest in focusing on shovel-ready projects for implementation, which is obviously great. That's what we all, it's all what we want to see at the end of the day. But as we know, it's very challenging to just have shovel-ready projects available. It's very expensive to do the initial planning, the capacity building, the designs are expensive, the permitting is very expensive, especially in certain states. So we've developed this pipeline where no matter where you are kind of on the spectrum of trying to do this kind of work, we try to have a category available for you to come in and apply. So the first category we have in our pipeline is called community capacity building and planning. So this is, sometimes there'll be initial planning efforts. You'll see a lot of stakeholder engagement. One of the common deliverables for these kinds of projects would be building a resilience plan, for example. And then moving along the pipeline, site assessment. So you're really looking at initial designs. You're looking at the feasibility of projects that have been identified through the communities. The end result is sort of a no-go or no-go decision on carrying out a project to final design. So you might see I'm sorry about that. I don't know why I keep switching. You might see a 30% design come out of those site assessments. Final design and permitting. So the goal of this would be to have a project that is shovel ready and ready for implementation when it's funded. So like I said, I know permitting can be very expensive, especially in states like California with CEQA. It takes a lot of time. So those final design and permitting projects, those are really to get you into that final stage of the pipeline, which is restoration implementation. So that's boots on the ground building projects. So one thing we should note, when we do restoration implementation projects, we really do want them to be at 100% design or very close to 100% design. In the past, we have funded some design build projects, but we've had some issues there, just owing to the fact that throughout the design process, costs become increased. It's harder to find extra money to put onto projects, so it's easier for us to really be sure that a project is shovel ready to fund those implementation projects. The graph below shows, this is from the 2023 grant slate, it shows sort of the diversity of the projects that we've funded in the pipeline. You notice they're pretty evenly split. We will fund typically a smaller amount of the restoration and implementation projects, but because those are so much more expensive, those will still take up kind of the lion's share of the funding, about 50%, sometimes higher than 50% of that funding. Just a quick little list of accomplishments. So from 2018 to 2023, the NCRF program has invested over $450 million into 400 projects. In terms of the matching funds on those, we've leveraged more than $462 million in match for a total conservation impact of nearly $1 billion, which is super exciting. Some of the metrics out of the restoration projects to note, over 76 miles of beach and dune restoration, nearly 50,000 acres of wetland restoration, 400 acres of marine habitats, and over 20,000 acres of rivers and floodplains. And of course, that doesn't include the planning efforts and the resiliency plans and all the capacity building that we've been supporting as well. So in terms of some of the kind of the tips and things to think about if you're interested in applying for this kind of funding, I mentioned it before, but it's really important to have equal weight on the two dual goals of the program. Like I said, it's owing to the fact that there's so many different types of projects we fund in so many different regions. It's easy to, if you have a really large marsh restoration project in a more rural area, really easy to make that note of the habitat benefits, but then you have to kind of make the case for the community benefits as well. And then you have the same issue with, say, you're looking at a living shoreline project in the Bronx or something. It's going to be harder to make the habitat benefit, but there's a huge community resilience component there. So we recognize that it's not going, not every project is going to hit both of these goals with the same sort of the same level of benefit, but they do need to be there. So we'll fund projects that have stronger community benefits, projects that have stronger ecological benefits. We do need that connection. Also important to note that we are focused entirely on nature-based solutions. So a lot of larger projects will have multiple components. There might be living shorelines and restoration efforts, but they also might be putting in some flood pumps. There might be a breakwater or sort of a flood wall component to a project as well. That's perfectly fine. We expect to see that, but we are primarily interested in funding the nature-based side of that. So that's a great opportunity, to find funding for the more gray infrastructure and have us come in and support the nature-based features. In terms of competitiveness, obviously cost effectiveness is huge for us. We have such a large number of requests every year. We really want to make sure we're getting the most bang for our buck. Like I say, with this being a national program, we know that materials in Guam are going to cost a lot more. We are aware of regional variances in price, but we do want to make sure that as you're writing your applications, to really make the case that the solutions you're proposing are cost efficient, that you've done the research, done the due diligence, and that this is an effective way of meeting your goals. Now, since as a funder, our priority is to really have the maximum impact we can, so that sometimes will it leads to wanting to support projects with large outcomes, big metrics, large scale, but there are so many good projects that are just smaller in scale, right? So how do you stay competitive if you have a smaller project? You should really be focusing on transferability, scalability, and innovation. So if you have a smaller project, but it can be a model for other communities in your region, if it can be a model for other projects within the same watershed, that helps us kind of make the case that we can fund that. If it's scalable, so if you have a pilot project and you just want to get something into the ground to build out a much larger effort over the next few decades, years, whatever it may be, that helps us sell it too. And also innovation. We want to make sure that we're supporting the best practice, cutting edge science, new techniques. That's also something we're very interested in. So for example, there are certain marsh marsh terracing activities that happen quite often in the Gulf. We're starting to see folks apply some of those techniques in the Mid-Atlantic. So that's a way of transferring information, bringing it to a new region. That's something that we want to see. We want to see if those same methods work in other areas of the country. And then one thing that's very important, especially with the earlier stages of the pipeline, you really want to see community-driven work as opposed to, I mean, community outreach is important, but we want to see projects that are based on what the community really needs. We want to see meaningful engagement. This is much more time intensive. It takes more money. It takes more effort. But proper community engagement isn't handing out flyers or doing mailers. That can be a component of an effort, but we really want to see things that are led by community champions that are based on the wants and needs of communities. And then I'll speak a little bit more about building your narrative on my next slide. So when you are building that narrative, you really do want to think about the larger context and the big picture. So how does this specific project fit into the broader context of resiliency in your region? Is it aligned with local planning documents, your comprehensive plan, your hazard mitigation plans? If your state has a resiliency plan, has it been prioritized through some of those formal planning documents? Has this been the result of several years worth of community outreach engagement, community charrettes and design? That's the kind of thing we want to see to make sure that these aren't projects that just kind of came in without good consent of the community, without the desires of the community being met. And then I mentioned already the habitat and transferability. I've got a few more slides to go through, so I'll speed up a little bit. Also really important for us to think about partnerships and technical expertise. So we need to know that you have the capacity to do the work you're proposing. So we want to see strong technical partners who have a background doing this work. If you are an NPO who's looking at planning, we need to know that it has the support of the local and regional governments. We don't want to see plans sit on a shelf. We want them to be aligned with formal documents. And it's important that even if you don't have that expertise, it doesn't mean that you may not get funded. It just means that you need to have a plan for obtaining that sort of expertise. Do you have a plan to hire the subcontractors you need to do this kind of work? Do you have a technical advisory committee made up with folks that are leaders in this kind of resiliency work in your area? In terms of the way we evaluate proposals, we have two kind of periods. So initially you submit a pre-proposal, which is a much smaller proposal. It's limited to 2 pages. If you are advanced to the next stage, you have a full proposal that is much more intense. I think it's an 8-page document, but you can also add in a lot of different attachments. It's going to have a much more complete budget. The folks who review these, we have internal staff at NFWF. We also have our regional leads at NFWF, external partners who are kind of key stakeholders in coastal resiliency all throughout the country. So there's a wide range of folks who do review these, but it's important to note that it's a national program and resiliency means a lot to a lot of different folks. So it is really important to have a clear, concise elevator pitch in your proposal. It's one of the things I've noticed with really cool, innovative projects. Sometimes folks are kind of so in the weeds doing something cutting edge that they forget that it might be brand new to someone reviewing that proposal. You want to make sure that you have a clear, concise ask when you kind of come in on that pre-proposal stage. One of the easy ways to check your capacity for these projects is to look at our applicant control questionnaire. So this is basically a small document we have, and I can actually send it out if folks are interested in taking a look at it. But this is basically the flags that our compliance team looks at to make sure that you have the systems in place to handle this kind of grant. And if you don't, we really do want to work with you. It's a huge priority for us to work with smaller organizations, underserved communities, so we can work with you on that. You can think about fiscal sponsorship. There's all kinds of things you can do. And then I believe I have another slide on match, so I'll move to that real fast too. Like I said, match is not required, it is encouraged. The important thing, if you don't have cash on hand to count as match, we consider in-kind and cash matches completely equally. So if you have volunteer hours, if you have in-kind support, if you can get deferred indirect costs, if you can get equipment or vegetation, plants donated for your project, it's really the effort that shows this is a project that has broader support, the community's involved. you have a lot of volunteer working on the project. That is the kind of stuff that really helps make the case. So if you don't have cash, you shouldn't kind of ignore the match requirement and say, oh, it's not required. So if we see those kinds of in-kind match opportunities, it really helps sell the case for us as well. A couple common mistakes that people make pretty often. This goes back to that elevator pitch, but this is a national program. We do a whole lot of different projects. Remember that we might not be as attuned to what's happening in your region or in your city, community. So make sure that you're kind of scaling that up and explaining to us where the big risks are and where how your project will actually address those risks and concerns. Always start early. People say this all the time, and it amazes me how many folks put in their applications 10 minutes before the deadline. It's just the nature of doing work on a computer, but there are always going to be technical issues. If you've not used our Easy Grant software before, it's a bit of a misnomer. It's not always that easy. And then the system for award management is something we're trying to move away from, but right now it's still a requirement. This is a federal component that can take, to register for SAM, I think sometimes it will take months to get your registration to go in. So please start early. Also make sure you have a really clear budget, really clear timeline. This really helps us have flexibility. So like, as you saw in that beginning slide, this year we have something like $750 million in requests. So it's very, very competitive. If we can see your clear budget and there's components of your project that we love and money is tight, if you have a really strong budget, it gives us flexibility. We can award partial funding. We can get you into the pipeline. We can work with you on that. So something to definitely focus on. And then really prioritize feedback, ask questions. For many years, the NCRF program has been pretty understaffed. And for the first time, we're actually at full capacity. We have 3 program managers now. So we are here to help develop your best proposals. And we've also got a whole team. I've got a slide about the field liaisons, so I'll save that. But during the kind of the pre-application period, we do a series of proposal labs where we can meet with you one-on-one for 20 minutes and talk through your project, ask any questions you have, answer anything you have. We have several FAQ documents, guidance documents, recorded webinars. There's a ton of good information in there. And then also every grant we've ever awarded is on our website. We have all of our previous grant slates. You can see the kind of projects that we fund. You can see where our priorities have been. It can really help you kind of get a better idea of what we're looking for in this program. And then CREST, I have another slide for that too, so I'll keep it moving. I know I'm starting to run out of time here. So technical assistance. We have a whole team of field liaisons through Throw Environmental and the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society. These are free services. We contract with these folks to provide all kinds of guidance for you, to help you write your applications, to answer any questions you might have. Follow up, if you haven't been selected for funding, they'll follow up with you and work through to make your application more competitive. And this is a free service. So if you are a first-time applicant and you're not quite sure, I would deeply encourage you to use these field liaisons. That's what we're there for. So we want to make sure that you're using those folks and getting the best proposals you can. Now, this is, I was talking about CREST. This is a tool that we've developed. And I mentioned that the challenge that sometimes comes from trying to make the case about community benefits and fish and wildlife benefits. That's kind of a challenging thing to do. So NFWF worked with UNC Asheville, NEMEC, to develop what we call regional coastal resilience assessments. And this is basically a GIS tool that has several different indexes. So there's a fish and wildlife index that looks at aquatic and terrestrial species of concern, community exposure index that looks at sea level rise, critical infrastructure, social vulnerability, a bunch of different data fields that are all stacked together. And it shows what we call resilience hubs. These are areas that have both of these dual benefits highlighted. But also, if you go anywhere within the footprint of the NCRF, you'll have tools and quantifiable stats on, this is an area that's highly vulnerable to sea level rise. It's an area that has an ecological corridor in it. So it helps make the case that you are hitting those dual benefits. I will note that as a national siting document, it's not always going to be accurate. If your project area is not scoring that high, that's okay. I mean, obviously, the risks and the benefits on the ground better than we do. So I wouldn't be discouraged if your project areas don't come up high on this. but it's a great tool you have, and it can, you can add it into your application and show us that your projects have those dual goals. That all sits within our coastal resilience evaluation and setting tool. That's what CREST is. The link is here on this slide, and I know Campbell's going to send this presentation out afterwards, so I'll give you a chance to look at that later on. Just in terms of the timeline, so this isn't set in stone for 2025, but it's going to be very comparable. So basically, we start our webinars and the proposal labs for the pre-proposal in late February, early March. Those pre-proposals are due early to mid-April. We'll invite you back to full proposal if you've been selected by kind of the end of May 2024. The full proposal for this year was due early July 2nd. That's probably going to be the same. And then we'll award those grants typically late November, early December 2024. So like I said, that'll be a similar timeline for next year. So I'm sorry, I know I ran through those. I realize I'm getting a little late on time. But my contact information is here, as well as the information for our director and the other program managers. Please do reach out with questions at any time. Even if it's not in that pre-proposal timeline, we are always here to help. Like I said, we're fully staffed now, so we really want to make sure that we are, supporting you all, providing the information we can, and making sure that you have the best applications you can. So thanks very much for your time, and I'll be around to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ross. And reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and I will make sure to ask them when we start the Q&A. I'm going to pass it over to John to share a little bit about his project that received funding from NCRF. And then, go from there.
All right. Hello, everybody. John Compton here in Camden, New Jersey, and it's a pleasure to speak with you. I've distilled my comments here down to trying to put myself into your shoes. Someone thinking of applying, what I wish I would have known, or maybe how I would have handled the process now with some hindsight. So I won't describe very much about our project in particular, but if you have any questions, then make sure to drop that in the chat. So I'll go through a few points about the application process. I'll mention a little bit about running an RFP process, and then some points about once the grant is activated. So during the application process, you probably already have somewhat of an idea as to why you are applying, what brought you to this webinar, but you need to think about your local context. And for us here in Camden, we have an urban context. We have 3 different waterways that pass through the city. It's a low point geographically, and there's already significant flooding that occurs in the city and affects residents. And we also have a sewer system that's a combined sewer system, so that sewage and stormwater both use the same pipe, so we have combined sewer overflows. So many rain events cause compound flooding coming from multiple sources. We are a small community-based organization. Our normal budget size is usually around 200 to 250,000. And so we often have 2 to 3 staff, so we're relatively small. So we took a look at what the scope that we would like to address in our proposal, and we thought about maybe just doing a portion of the city, focus on problem areas, and so something you'll have to decide is, in your geographic area, where would you like to cover? We decided to cover the entire city. And part of that is because the next step that I would recommend is to take a look at what has already been done in your area. And so we did that. We looked for existing studies, existing plans, and any sort of green infrastructure or flood mitigation or habitat restoration work that's already occurred in Camden. And after reviewing all of that, we realized that there wasn't really any comprehensive resilience planning that had been done. But there had been quite a bit of flood mitigation work, especially through the local sewage authority with their long-term control plan. So we took a close look at that and developed our proposal off of that and a few other smaller green infrastructure projects that had been proposed throughout the city. All right, next I would say is you got to think about your partners. So for us, we thought about local government, county government, state representation, and it can be a challenge to get in our city buy-in from the local government. And luckily, we eventually were able to get that. And we're very pleased. It was through the planning department that we had success. Maybe for you, it would be a Parks Department or through the mayor's office. It just depends on your local environment. The county runs our municipal utility, the sewage authority. So we already had a relationship with them, and they were a partner in the project. And then the Department of Environmental Protection, the NJDEP, eventually we were also able to get them on board. We have some academics from the New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative that joined our coalition. They were very key in helping to identify key other figures that needed to be a part of our technical panel. And then for nonprofits, we have local, regional, and national. We had a national group that I'd like to mention called the Anthropocene Alliance. They were very helpful through this process. And if you're a small nonprofit that is not connected with them, I highly recommend looking them up. That's Anthropocene Alliance. And then we had some community development corporations throughout the city. That's very important for doing community outreach, which is a huge part of the community capacity building part of this grant. And then there were some regional nonprofits that specialize in watershed education. So we had one of those as well. Next is the budget. So the budget's very important in my opinion. I would think about what can you accomplish in-house? What would you like to give out a sub-grant for? And what would you need to get a contractor for? And trying to distinguish between those three categories is very important. Do you have planning professionals on staff, or do you plan to hire someone to do that, to actually write a plan that is legible to decision makers and is actually usable and professional? Do you need flood modeling or some sort of engineering input on the type of project you're envisioning? Has that work already been done and you can access that as public information, or do you need to contract that out to be done for the first time? That's an important distinction to make. I know of at least another organization that got a NFWF grant at the same time that we did, and they decided to keep most of their budget in-house. They only were going to contract out for flood modeling. We went a different route and didn't feel like we had the capacity to do the planning portion ourselves, so we decided to contract that out. So a very large portion of our budget actually is allocated for hiring a contractor to do the planning and also to do the flood modeling. So if you're going to do that, one mistake that we made was we didn't realize at the time of application that you can't choose your contractor ahead of time. You have to follow federal procurement policies. So there has to be a public, open process that's documented, that you've considered multiple proposals. So I'll talk about that in a second. But that's very important. We actually wrote an organization in to do that, and then had to remove them once we realized that that was not allowed. And then we invited them along with other groups to submit proposals. The last thing I'll say about budget to keep in mind is indirect costs. I think that's a great feature of the NFWF grants, is that you're allowed to allocate some of your budget to indirect costs. If you haven't applied for a federal grant before, which we had never done before ourselves, you might not know that you can actually negotiate a rate that is applied to federal grants. So I would Google or look up MTDC, which is the modified total direct costs. This is something that you can set up ahead of time. If you don't do that, which we have not, then you can claim the de minimis rate, which is 10%. All right, so for the RFP process, if you get awarded your grants, then and you have contractors that you need to acquire, then you need to do an RFP process. And for, if this was something new for us, perhaps it's not for some of you, but for us, this was a really big deal, and to do this properly. And so to write an RFP, you have to really define what are your responsibilities going to be very clearly. And you have to very clearly define what the responsibilities are going to be of your contractor. You don't want to have any ambiguities later down through the project or have any misunderstandings about what you have asked of your contractor to do to make sure that you have a smooth process. There's a couple ways to handle asking for proposals. You can either ask the proposer to include a budget that they are comfortable with to meet the requirements in your RFP, or you can include a not to exceed amount. There's advantages to both of those. We chose to include a not to exceed amount, which means that all of our proposals were basically at that number. We didn't get too much deviation there. So then you're going to compare your proposals based on what they are offering, what services are they offering for that price. And there was quite a bit of difference there. So we were pleased with how that turned out. We had an interest session with quite a bit of interest. We had more than a dozen entities reach out that were interested and that attended our interest session. We had a review process that we were careful to document. We had knowledgeable people that read and scored the proposals. I think the proposals that we received were really excellent. We got 7 proposals, and after scoring them, we had one clear winner. At that point, you have to negotiate a contract with that, with your chosen contractor. And so we had to obtain a lawyer to help us with that, make sure that we did that process properly. All right, so that would bring you to, if once you've had your contract awarded, it has to be activated. And that's one thing that I didn't realize, was that it's not necessarily going to activate the day that you're notified, or even the day that your calendar starts that you've put into your proposal. There's an internal process through NFWF where your grant does receive another round of review, and they may ask for to make edits to your proposal or to your budget. And this happened to us through several rounds. And I know from some other organizations that also were awarded, they were maybe 3, 4, 5 months it took them, and ours took about 11 months. So that was quite a delay for us. And so I would be prepared for having a delay before you're able to actually start working on your project. If you're big enough, you have a budget, you can start incurring costs on your project without the reimbursements from NFWF, then perhaps that's a different situation for you. But for us, we were going to really be reliant on those reimbursements. So we had to delay the beginning of our project for quite some time. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is being prepared financially for administering a grant. As a small nonprofit, we don't have a enormous bank account. We were worried about having the funds to pay our contractor. And so we got a line of credit and actually had to change banks in order to facilitate that. But when it came down to it, during the contract negotiation process, we were able to negotiate an installment system. So we're paying them monthly, so we don't have extremely large chunks that we have to deposit, as it turned out. So I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much for that information, John. That's super helpful context as somebody who's receiving that grant, especially as a smaller organization as well. We did receive a message from Alicia, so I just wanted to ask the audience, is there somebody from Junction Coalition here who is here to present on behalf of the organization? Oh, okay, I think I see you. Your name is Deanna Toledo, which I know is not your name, but
I'm Maria. I'm kind of, Alicia's stand-in.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Having been involved with the development of the organization since the very beginning. And our presentation is short. It's mostly pictures, but if you think of the process that Ross outlined and that John just took us through, that very similar to what happened to us and what we've been doing. And I don't know, because I wasn't in on the process from the very beginning. I can't answer questions relative to that. I've kind of like, been absorbed into the process in the middle. But let's see, let me just share my screen and take you through just mainly photos. Okay.
I just made you co-host, so you might not have had sharing power before, but you should now.
Oh, okay. Now, how do I get to my desktop?
Can you press the green share button at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and then it should come up with different boxes that have different options of windows to share. And you can select the one that you're trying to share with the audience.
Okay, let's see. All right, oh, you know what? Can I go to the little icon that says the File Explorer?
I'm not sure what that will do.
I'm unmuting just to help here. Diana, who's not Diana, stop screen sharing. Go to your desktop like you normally would go back and forth between Zoom and your desktop and open up what you want to share. And then come back to Zoom and screen share then. And then it'll pop up and you'll see it on your screen. You'll see anything you have open on your screen and you just select the one you want to share. And it'll share.
Thank you so much for the explanation, Karen.
No problem.
I have the PowerPoint open. And what do I do next?
So you can go to Zoom, the Zoom window, and then you can press share. There's a green button that says share. And then you can use that to share the you can select the window that you're trying to share with the audience. So I think that you should press stop share.
Press.
Do you see that? It should be at the top of your screen. There should be a red button that says stop share.
Oh, yes. Okay, yes.
So when you hit share again, make sure that you select the presentation that you're trying to show everyone. So there should be multiple windows. Yeah. Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, there you go. Perfect. Thanks so much. So we can all see that. There you go.
Okay. And how can I get, all right, I did. I'm so always very happy when technology works for Granny.
You're doing
And
great.
my name is Maria, by the way, Marya, Maria. Okay, we are working on a little river that forms about 2 miles of the boundary of our community through Toledo. Most Toledoans don't know that Toledo has 3 rivers, the very large Maumee River, and in the north part of Toledo, the 10-Mile Creek Ottawa River, and in the southern part of Toledo, where Junction is, the river called Swan Creek. And these names are traditional, and so they go back. This is the Swan Creek watershed, and Swan Creek begins in the west of Toledo in the area called the Oak Openings and ends in the Maumee River. It flows into the Maumee River. And the part of Toledo and the part of Swan Creek that we're going to be concerned about, that we're going to be working on, is the Heilman Ditch area. So this area has been ditched and creeked because of agriculture, for example. But the character of the river has pretty much stayed the same. There are wetlands in the area that need to be reconnected in order to control flooding, for example. So this is the stem of the river that flows into Toledo, that flows through Toledo. And this little part, part of it, this little thumb shape is the area that is directly impacted by the junction community and impacts the junction. This is the junction community outlined in red and white, once called Onyx when Toledo had community development corporations, but we now call it the junction community. And this is the meander that forms Swan Creek and then continues through, continues here. Can you see my cursor?
Yeah, we can see
Where my cursor is going. Okay, yeah. So right about the rim is where it flows into the Maumee River, and then the Maumee River flows into Maumee Bay and Lake Erie, which is why we were able to get a coastal, which is why we were able to put the coastal resilience spin on the area. You can see, because my lost some resolution, this is a park named Landers, and in the thumb is a park named Sterling Field, which we would like to see connected as a larger entity. And we've already done charrettes with our youth on what this could look like. So the junction community borders almost 2 miles of 40-mile long Swan Creek, with Landers Park on one side and Sterling Field on the other. The title of our grant and project are Planning for Wetland and Stream Restoration in the Heilman Ditch Swan Creek Subwatershed. And the Junction Coalition and partners will work with the residents in order to plan, prioritize, plan, first of all, teaching the community about the importance of wetlands, riparian buffers, floodplains, for example, and the need for reforestation. So we are also going to look to partners who can help us with some of the reforestation. So this is a multi-partner project, and the community will prioritize what are the resilience strategies. Our neighborhood is underserved. It's very much a low-income neighborhood, one of the lowest income neighborhoods in Toledo, one of about 4 or 5 low-income neighborhoods in Toledo. But we also need to concentrate, because this is a fish and wildlife grant. We also need to teach the community and concentrate on restoration of wildlife habitats in our area. These are our partners. I'll keep quiet so that you can read them, including the already mentioned Anthropocene Alliance, which I agree with John has been very instrumental in helping us organize. Those of you who are familiar with Toledo know that Metro Parks Toledo is a very large organization which is putting Toledo in touch with nature. They have accomplished this by acquisitions of property, so that now there is no Toledoan, no Toledo household less than more than 5 miles from a metro park. Some of them very small, like pocket parks, many of them along the river. 3 agencies in Toledo, Freshwater Future, Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur's office, Ohio Sea Grant, for example. So, and you in writing your grants and designing your projects will be working with a similar suite of organizations. Now, this is a blow up of the target area of the project, with Swan Creek, with going a little bit beyond east of Swan Creek. Here is on this edge is Landers Park, and here is Sterling Park, which already has a city-owned, this is a city park, a city-owned semi-professional baseball diamond. And this area of Sterling Field is typically used for rugby. But this meander was once, in the early 1900s, this meander was once part of this neighborhood down below. And Center Street actually ran through Sterling Park to this riparian vegetation, and there were probably about 10 houses along here. But this is a 100-year floodplain. The soil is very spongy and muddy, and so I don't know what the history was of that neighborhood going away. Now, this area in between is probably a several $1 million cleanup of a brownfield cleanup. There are empty warehouses, empty factories, some little businesses tucked in here, some little businesses tucked in this set of buildings right here. And all of the rest of this is what I call a graveyard, a junkyard of disposed cars, semi-trailers, and so on. There are several boats in here which we could refurbish for high flooding areas. All of this needs to be cleared away. And we all appreciate that this will take several $1 million and is really not part of this grant, but it is part of the RFP. So what we'd like the community in getting the community involved is several bridges, several pedestrian bridges, not car bridges, not auto bridges, but several pedestrian bridges which will connect the community to these fields, okay, these areas. And so that's in the works. We've also reached out to this community below Sterling Park, which is really part of another community called the Historic Broadway Corridor. But they're kind of one of these communities that's forgotten and neglected, and so we decided to make them honorary members of the junction, and that outreach has already taken place. Now, what we are thinking of in restoring, remediating, and creating new is park-like settings, several park-like settings with bridges. These great blues really weren't there, were kind of put in. They really weren't there to pose for us. They're relatively shy animals, but this gives you an idea, kind of, a conceptual drawing of what parts of this could look like. This street is called City Park Street, and our children and young people fish from this street across this railing. Another possibility is the creation of a little fishing pier and access. And because Sterling Field is a 100-year floodplain, we're thinking, let's continue the flooding, let's flood the area and make it available for kayaking, canoeing, walking, biking, etc. And our young people would like to see an ice skating rink somewhere in the area. They've made a number of suggestions as to what they'd like to do for recreation. The Metro Parks is in the process of completing a park called Glass City Metro Park right on the Maumee River. However, in order for our children to go there, their parents have to, get in the car, get them there, and take them to that particular park. So we're thinking, can some of those amenities be in this large area that we are considering? So,
would you mind wrapping up? I want to make sure we have enough time for questions from the audience. We've got a bunch in the chat. Just want to make sure we can.
This is the last slide. We've done community education and engagement before very successfully. One of them resulted in our community greening plan. Another charrette process resulted in the formation of our strategic master plan. And so we will engage the community again like this. All righty. Now, okay, you are screen sharing, stop share.
There you go.
Hello again. Okay, hello again.
Thanks so much for that. Thank you for that presentation. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that we had time to ask some questions from the audience. I know that there are a bunch of responses in the chat, so thank you so much, Ross and John, for responding, and I'll make sure to send out the Q&A after the webinar as well. But yeah, we had a few questions from the chat and also that people were interested in hearing the answer to. I'm not totally sure which ones got answered, but I'm going to go forward with this and Ross or John, let me know which of these questions you were able to get to in the chat. But the first one that I'm seeing here is, does NFWF prioritize projects that are already in the pipeline, e.g. a project that is in community capacity building and planning phase and are interested in applying for site assessment and preliminary design? Next, would they be given priority during review?
Yes, so we do try to prioritize those pipeline projects. I've got a longer answer in the chat there. But we do try to. As we get into implementation, it gets harder with the amount of money available. So we want to see you're also looking at other funding sources. But say you're going from capacity building up to final design, that certainly is. And then also to restoration, we definitely do want to encourage it, but we don't guarantee that it will always be funded. Thanks
so much for that answer, Ross.
One question that I see is about the 15% de minimis on the indirect rate. Is NFWF going to adopt that as the minimum indirect rate folks can charge in their project as of October?
Yes, we will. There's still a discussion with our compliance team about when that will go into effect for the 2024 slate, but by 2025, that will certainly be in effect for the 2025 slate.
Great.
Wonderful. This question says, has Ross seen any projects that benefited sources of drinking water and thus meet the community benefits part of the project requirements? For example, I could see drinking water systems threatened by flooding interested in flood resilience projects.
That's an interesting question. Off the top of my head, I can't think of one that is really focused on that. I might have mentioned it as critical infrastructure. I think you could certainly make that case. And then I've also maybe just kind of having done work in rural areas before, I'm also really interested in like when septic systems get inundated by salt water and start to fail, things like that. So I think you could certainly make the case that would be critical infrastructure that would you'd also want to see a strong habitat benefit as well. But yeah.
Great, I appreciate that. So for the grantees, this was a question that folks had. Relative to other opportunities, how time consuming was this process?
I would say this is on the upper end of time consuming, given the amount of collaboration that you need to set up in order to have a successful proposal and project.
Yeah, and to that point, I would also say that I've mentioned before with the staffing, but now that we have kind of a larger team, we are trying to make it as easy as possible. We're hoping that this funding can sort of be a gateway to larger federal funding. So I know how exhausting it can be working with FEMA, doing brick applications, things like that. So we're trying to increase organizational capacity as well now, especially. So like for smaller organizations, in cases we funded accountants to make sure that folks can follow federal guidelines. We funded office space for really small organizations. So we are aware that it's been it can be time consuming and there have been delays, but something that's definitely a priority on our end is to make sure that we can streamline as much as possible.
Myra, I'm also curious to hear if Junction Coalition has any thoughts on that question as well.
As far as time consuming? Because I was kind of dropped into the project and then peripherally involved as local arrangements chair, for example. I really don't have a sense of how much time was spent on it, although I did provide Alicia, as she was writing, I did provide her with Swan Creek information and regional environmental information.
Gotcha.
John, if I may jump in, Campbell, I wonder if you might say a little bit more about compensating community members as part of your engagement. Can you talk a little bit more about how you structured that?
Sure. So we wanted to make sure that we had some kind of stipend for members of the public that would participate in any of our community outreach events. So we put in a budget for stipends, planning for about 6 community engagement sessions throughout the city. And then we have a 7th event, a design charrette that's also planned to be kind of like a more of a citywide event that we'll invite folks to. And then we have an ambassador program where we're gonna hire people from different parts of the city to do some community outreach in their respective neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Yes, we have, we are going to pay steering committee members as well, because we're asking the steering committee members to engage 10 other people for a total of about 50 people who are more hands-only involved and more closely involved in the project. And then, you know, each of those 10 people can reach out to others, but the steering committee members will be provided with stipends.
Thanks so much for those answers. So there were a few questions about advance payments. So I wanted to bring one of those back up, but does NFWF ever do advance payments? As John mentioned, it can be difficult for some smaller orgs and CBOs to jump through the hoops of financing and managing reimbursements. So I guess this question is for Ross.
Yes, so we can do that. It's a little harder to do for sure. We have to get a justification, and we can advance a payment, but it has to be spent within 30 days, or else we have to get any returned funds. I think that's a federal requirement. So that can be especially helpful. Sometimes a smaller organization, you know, maybe like 90% or 100% of their budget will be for a subcontractor. And so if you just have one or two, really large payments, if you work with us and we're aware of it in advance, we can make that happen. But if it was one of those things where you kind of needed an advance just for the sort of the month to month, that might be a bit of a burden. So that might be an opportunity for, looking at a fiscal sponsor.
Great, thanks so much for that response, Ross. We did have one more question that's kind of related to the question that was just asked to John and Myra. But what kind of stipends have you found to be best? Gift cards or? But yeah,
I don't know. I do not get involved with the money angle.
That's what we're planning to do because it's easy to document.
Great. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we're coming to the end of our time together, and super grateful for everyone for joining. Super grateful to our presenters for giving such wonderful presentations and sharing such helpful information about the National Coastal Resilience Fund. So thank you all so much for joining. I have a few things that I wanted to share before folks hopped off, which I will do right now. Let's just do that. There we go. But yeah, so just a reminder that we do have an evaluation survey. So we would love to get your feedback so that we can incorporate it into future sessions. Also, if you'd like to continue to follow the conversations around these different topics, you can subscribe to our newsletter, River Voices, and join our Mobilize, which is our online advocates forum and our online community. We also have our new climate resilience subgroup as well. And we also have like lots of webinars that come up on our page. So if you'd like to stay in the loop, keep track of what we're doing here at River Network. And we did also want to flag another opportunity, which is our new Rooted in Resilience Community Forestry Funding application that just dropped. So River Network is very excited about this. We are releasing a funding opportunity for forestry projects led by federally recognized tribes, Alaska Native corporations, villages, tribal organizations, organizations working in tribal communities, and community-based nonprofits. It's looking to fund projects in disadvantaged communities that improve the conditions of the tree canopy through planning and implementation, education outreach, or workforce development. It includes grants from $75,000 to $200,000 to support projects with a duration of 1 to 3 years, and there's no match required. So we highly recommend folks checking that out. And I want to say another thank you to our presenters. You all did amazing, and I really appreciate you all being here today. And thank you to the audience for joining. I hope this was a helpful webinar for all of you. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.